here with Wyatt. I'm looking at this book, and it's called The Bitcoinization of Finance. First off, Wyatt, good to see you.
Likewise, Rob. Nice to meet you too, man.
What are we looking at? Oh, this is a special edition.
That's right.
For the Texas
Thames.
Energy and Mining Summit. All right, so first off, who are you, and what is this book that we are shilling?
Yeah, so I'm Rod Ruhdi. I'm founder of Basilic Financial. We're a Bitcoin wealth management firm. So
Incredible.
We focus on sound money strategies and helping people acquire Bitcoin, navigate their lives, be good stewards of their wealth. One thing we're really focused on is we're the first generation of Bitcoiners, and with great power comes great responsibility. So how are we being good stewards of our wealth, being good examples on showing the next generation of Bitcoiners what we have and making sure it continues to live on.
Why, you are not an old man.
Correct. At least not yet.
How do you responsibly steward wealth? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny because a lot of these problems we're encountering today, it's not really a new problem per se. And so I've learned a lot from my friends and mentors in this industry, and most notably Andy Flattery. He's done a lot of research on the noblesse oblige, which
noblesse oblige, okay.
Old aristocratic families of old Europe.
Yeah,
it means nobility obligates in French. And so these were wealthy individuals that had a moral compass, and they operated with an ethics, and they really focused on taking care of their local communities. So they were the ones funding the church, sending their kids off to war. So it's wealthy people that were hyper connected in their local community and felt the obligation to be a good steward of their wealth.
So does Bitcoinization mean the return of a kind of noblesse oblige?
Well,
is
absolutely.
that the kind of culture we're building?
It's the one I'm advocating we build for.
And what does that look like?
Yeah. So I mean, it's. I think this is kind of one of the fun things about Bitcoin is there really is this strong culture around it, low time preference, all that sort of things. Invest for the future, and in doing so, it's okay. I believe, a firm believer, Bitcoiners will be the 1% of political and economic power, right? So it's well, once you get there, it's not you're just going to know what to do.
Yeah.
You have to have a moral worldview, a strong moral worldview on how you want to live your life and, live the change you want to be in the world. And so when you're in that position, you know what to rely on. And I think, and we've talked about this some, far too often, I think Bitcoiners make an idol of money, which I think is
you
wrong.
worship the coin.
Exactly.
But you're saying don't worship the coin.
Don't worship the coin. He's been getting egregious with that. I don't know if you've seen more of his recent posts because you.
No, tell me your thoughts on worshiping Bitcoin.
Well, it's evil. It's money should never be worshipped. We should acknowledge it as a tool, a technology, and use it to better our lives. But it should never be worshipped.
What are your thoughts on that, Eco?
Dude, yeah, 100%. Don't worship money. That's a false idol.
Exactly.
But then this other interesting take of Bitcoiners as individuals who are in the same way as a noblesse oblige. My wife would be very proud with her Francophile affections.
Well, you've spent a lot of time around the French.
In one way, shape, or form.
The French Quarter counts.
This
right?
idea, that's true. This idea of intentional community, a Bitcoin intentional community. And then the additional idea that if you get filthy stinking rich on Bitcoin, that doesn't actually tell you anything about your life. It doesn't tell you what to do with your life. So how do you run a financial management company or financial consultancy that actually integrates these ideas? What are you talking to people about?
Yeah, definitely. First and foremost, it centers on sound custody solutions. It's our minimum is 2 of 3 multi-sig, and making sure we focus a lot in terms of shrinking our risk surface area. So, identifying potential threats in a custody setup and making sure, we kind of navigate, around that. And then, from there, once we have a solid foundation, we generally get into inheritance planning. So it is a unique asset, specifically on the custody side. So making sure, I think it's very important, you're working with, professionals within a field like estate planning that are also Bitcoiners. So it's you want to work with somebody who not only understands speaks your language. I think it's hilarious. I get a lot of clients that end up coming to me because they have a lot of Bitcoin or want to talk about Bitcoin, and then their existing financial advisor laughs at them.
Doesn't have an interest.
Yeah, exactly. So it's okay, well, we're gonna sell this and reallocate to whatever, and they're absolutely not. I'm never selling my Bitcoin. And it's my clients come to me and they're I'm diversified. I have 70% Bitcoin, 30% MSTR. So they just get a lot of reassurance working with somebody that understands and speaks their language, understand where they're coming from. And so like there's some minutia on like the estate planning. You really don't want like your Bitcoin to go to probate. That could lead to some serious like security risks and compromises. So having the proper kind of structures in place, but then also making sure it's like your heirs like either one know how you want your Bitcoin to be allocated, or they've been taught how not to get scammed. There's a lot of people like, I wasn't the Bitcoiner, but now I have Bitcoin. Like they're like kind of ripe for like a honeypot scamming situation. So making sure that heirs not only know how to custody it, they're familiar with the asset, they're familiar with the technology, and then ultimately familiar with your goals and intentions for it.
Every other week, Jameson Lopp is tweeting about somebody's finger getting cut off.
Yeah,
there was just another one in France, like just a couple days ago.
Unbelievable. First, it was like one of the Trezor founders or Ledger founders.
Yeah, him and his wife were kidnapped.
And these are like the most Bush League abductors on the face of the earth. Did you hear the story? They Airbnb'd the houses. So if you're going to abduct somebody who's worth potentially billions of dollars, don't take them to an Airbnb.
Did they pay with Bitcoin?
Who knows? They didn't take him to the Batcave, surely. They got caught pretty quickly. I'm pretty sure the doors got kicked in or C4'd off or something like this. So you're thinking long-term, you're thinking noblesse oblige, you're thinking about family identity, multi-generational identity, values. Is this all captured in the book? Can you introduce us to the book and what this is about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a whole section on personal finances and how to approach that, in terms of, Bitcoin within like kind of like your more intimate life. But the book itself kind of takes like a broader approach too. And I kind of think of it as like, it's pretty funny. We've talked about this too, where it's like Bitcoiners kind of have like a disdain for professional services.
Sure.
Which, like, fair, quite honestly fair. But I think specifically finance too. But it's funny because, no industry is like immune to fiatness. Right.
Sure.
It's like, it's pervasive. It spreads everywhere. I think finance was particularly like impacted because I really think of finance as like the business of money. And so it's kind of like the first one to get corrupted by fiat. And so like the book just kind of like zooms out a little bit, where it's like, I do more or less view financialization as like a dirty word. Our lives have been over financialized. Like that's not a good thing. However, like there are still tried and true, like time proven financial products, strategies, and tools that we can implement.
That's right.
Into Bitcoin.
Yeah, markets are not new.
Exactly.
Derivatives are not new. They're not going and evaporating into the ether.
Yeah.
There are very legitimate reasons for futures markets to exist. Like you wouldn't be able to create a CBOE or a commodities exchange out of Chicago if you didn't have that, because your farmers would have gone broke in the meantime, or they wouldn't be able to hedge. It's one person. You're going to be here for the next couple of days with us. You'll be here for the full Thames.
Oh, yeah.
So you need to talk to Pierre Richard when he comes through, because he had a fantastic analogy when we were talking about his new company, the Bitcoin Bond Company. And I mentioned to him, I said, exactly the point that you made. A lot of people are very phobic of traditional finance. They go, it's scams built on top of BS. Like, what's the deal with this? And he goes, listen, the current system exists in that way. And the current system is going to become Bitcoinized, which means you will, over a point in time, continue to substitute out the parts of the existing system with new parts that are Bitcoin-based. And those Bitcoin-based products and services are fundamentally going to be more sound than the fiat ones, just de facto. It's sort of this like ship of Theseus, where you're pulling a piece off and putting one back in, but you're really kind of pulling off a piece of wood and putting in a piece of graphite or putting in a piece of carbon fiber, right? So you're actually making the thing better as you sub out the parts. And I think it really mirrors exactly what you just said, this idea of, hey, it's kind of a dirty system for now because it's not Bitcoin-based. So you, just looking through the chapters that you have here, you can tell just by the chapter headings. A blueprint for free markets, derivatives, swaps. I really want to know what swaps are. I don't
think you do.
But I've something about future cash flows. Am I good there, Wyatt? Do I understand them?
A lot of the time they're used for interest rates.
Well, that'll be a side conversation. Financialization of Bitcoin mining, lending, collateral, the investment case, custody, advanced financial strategies, treasury policy. So really this book is meant to be a handbook for individuals who are doing what? Who's going to pick this up and love this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's for Bitcoiners that need to know more about finance and how Bitcoin can benefit from finance, and
Yeah.
then for finance professionals on how Bitcoin can benefit their work. And you're absolutely right, Rob, because when you apply like these financial tools, products, and strategies to Bitcoin, ultimately you're deepening Bitcoin capital markets, and like deeper capital markets ultimately just means like more information, and you as an economic actor.
The seat's warm. I'm just going to say that. Very
That's
warm.
a telltale sign.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I don't know. Eco, I just met him, but he looks like he leaves a warm seat.
He's a warm dude.
Yeah.
Big heart.
Yeah, so it's like you as an economic user or economic actor, like you stand to benefit from more information being available to you. And like that happens with more robust markets, which means like you have more robust products. It's like we're building a contract on top of an asset. Well, not only did that asset have a buyer and a seller, but now that contract has a buyer and a seller. So it's like you just added a market on top of a market. And like people, all economic actors will stand to like benefit from more information. And you're absolutely right. And so it's like when we look at the Bitcoinization of finance, I really kind of define that as a financial system, where value, custody, and settlement are innate in neutral protocol.
Yeah.
Right. And so now once we're building like financial products on top of solid foundation, we get back to the exact analogy, you and Pierre, were referencing about, rebuilding the ship, and him and Morgan were both a huge inspiration for me.
Morgan, she's a genius. Morgan Richard, Pierre's wife, also runs a financial consultancy.
Yep. That's right.
Are you homies with her? Do you compare notes?
Yeah, so we're both part of the Bitcoin Financial Advisors Network.
I love it.
Yeah, we have.
What is this?
Well, it's like a kind of like a trade group.
Are you the one
like,
DMing me? Send me one Bitcoin.
How's
I
your
send
trade
you back.
going?
How's your trade going? Send me.
Yeah, I send you back 3.
Because I'm waiting for my Bitcoin.
To get it back.
To get back.
I got 2 back.
You got 2 back?
Yeah.
Shit. Okay, it works. So you guys do that typically at the space. You guys get together and then send one Bitcoin and then get 2. It just shows up.
It's a big wash trading mechanism, actually.
Can't talk about that.
Ethereum, Rod. We do it with the.
I knew it. I knew it. Why? You don't know me that well, Tim.
It's all wrapped Bitcoin.
It's what?
Wrapped Bitcoin?
Yeah, wrapped Bitcoin is real Bitcoin, right, guys? Oh, well played. Sorry, go back to what you were saying, because...
Yeah, so it's like a trade group is probably like too formal of a name, but, it's like a, a network of, financial advisors that, work and focus on Bitcoin. So, we get together, once a quarter and have kind of like a brain trust meetups, bounce ideas off each other, see how things are going in the ecosystem.
I'm still thinking about Tyler Stevens saying that wrapped Bitcoin is really just women's Bitcoin. Or Michelle, shout out to Michelle if you're watching right now. The relay policy is what's going to be in the next block. I don't know. What do you want in the next block? That was back to finance.
Thank you.
So this book has come out. How long has it been out?
Well, so this is actually the launch of the Bitcoinization of
It's
Finance.
brand new.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go, man.
And
it even says Texas Energy Mining Summit.
Dude, the guys at Brains, I don't know how they do it. They're like, all right, Rod and Rob and all these guys are going to do another summit at some point. We're going to get one of these guys to write a book, and we're just launching books at the energy and mining summits.
Now, are you familiar with Firefish, this acquisition that Brains had?
Yeah.
Can you explain to us what Firefish is? Because I saw it, I said, that's pretty cool. Then, is it Marcus, the CEO of Firefish?
I've spoken with Igor. I believe that's his co-founder's name.
Okay. It was these guys, but what is the deal with this Firefish thing?
Yeah, so lending and collateral is actually like one of the most like bullish, new spaces like Bitcoin and finance. Like in my opinion, I think like we're starting to see a lot more companies, come online, and I think there's going to be tremendous growth here because, especially when Bitcoin's kind of in its store value, phase before it moves to medium exchange and unit of account. It's like good Bitcoiners, like they don't want to sell. Sure. Bitcoin. So if they have dollar-denominated liabilities, how do we use our Bitcoin as collateral to get dollars in exchange? And in the book, I kind of break this out. They're not like the most elegant names of it, but I use like traditional finance. So that would be like Goldman Sachs and I think it's New York Mellon. They've actually started like
BNY.
originating some loans using Bitcoin as collateral. So those are like the old stodgy guys that are like starting to pick this up. And then, I've classified them as like CFI, like centralized finance. So that's where I put like Unchained and Firefish. So these are like Bitcoin native companies that are starting to, lend out dollars in return for Bitcoin as collateral. And there's kind of like CFI has kind of like 2 buckets. So there are companies, like Unchained that actually are putting it on themselves to like get the dollars to lend out. But then there's also kind of like a marketplace, and that's where I would put like Firefish. So they actually build out a lot of the infrastructure.
Because it is kind of this two-sided marketplace of people who want to provide collateral, people who want to take loans.
Exactly. So if you have Bitcoin and need dollars, and I have dollars, like, we can both, I can put like my rates on like the Firefish, platform, and if they look good to you, you can like use your Bitcoin as collateral and get my dollars. And that, but what they do is they really, build a lot of the infrastructure out. So it's all 2 of 3, so your Bitcoin would go into an escrow account. Firefish or another key agent would have a key. You would have a key. I would have a key. And then they also help, kind of put like the good terms on the deal. So you want to be very cognizant of like
Sure.
your LTV ratio, the interest payment, how the interest is being charged. A lot of like sleazy players will try to do like interest rate on a daily basis, and so it's like
Compounds insanely quickly.
exactly. So you want to be like really careful of this. And I think Firefish is like above and beyond like good actors, and so they really kind of built that out in Europe. And they were actually doing something really cool. They started working with the London Stock Exchange on like their workspace, which is kind of like a Bloomberg terminal, using like historic Bitcoin loan interest rates. And what's cool about like lending specifically is as it gets more prolificated in the market and like more data gets available on something like a workspace, the interest rate that companies are charging or individuals are charging, on a loan using Bitcoin as collateral is really going to be kind of and this is kind of what I mean, it's like deeper capital markets, more information. It's like that interest rate is really going to kind of be like a market-wide indicator for the perceived risk of Bitcoin.
Oh, interesting. And this changes the characteristic of the market fully. The long-term effect of this is that it can change the insurance rates for somebody like an Anchor Watch, because now Lloyd's has way more data into what's happening in the lending markets.
Exactly.
Do you have thoughts about, I keep seeing these things about large companies, so Mara, who has a really, really large allocation of Bitcoin that they bought and mined, had announced that they are generating yield on their Bitcoin. Do you have thoughts about that mechanism? Because there's 2 things. One is, where does the yield come from? And then 2 is this the kind of thing that is only going to exist for, a large publicly traded entity? Or will Firefish be able to be competitive with it? Is it the kind of thing where Mara is always going to get substantially better rates than somebody who's just on a P2P market?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rob. And, like any good Bitcoiner, I'm extremely skeptical of like where yield comes from. The guys that build asset management, I think they've done like a beautiful job, producing yield. And it's like yield is really easy to get on dollars. It's really hard to get on.
What's the typical mechanism for like dollar yield? Just like buy a treasury?
Yeah, I mean, in like the TradFi sense, like any sort of like treasury, again, any sovereign debt, like you're getting paid back with printed money.
Robust market, though.
It is, and it's kind of like the default collateral, like a U.S. Treasury. And there's like some corporate bonds that are a little bit more palatable because that's like, a company paying you back interest.
Sure, or like a muni bond or something.
Yeah, muni bonds, it's like probably printed money again just because it's like a smaller form of government, but they're all using like...
It's all connected.
Yeah. But some tax breaks on muni bonds. So like what Bill did is they, Unchained originates, a loan. They structured like the most traditional finance private credit fund. So that private credit fund buys that loan, and then the investors in the private credit fund get paid out the interest rate, part of the interest rate from that original loan. So that loan that was originated, Bitcoin is collateral, you get dollars in return, you make those payments, that ultimately flows through to, Build's investors. That is straight tried and true TradFi yield. Like I have no problem with that yield. The problem though is if you're trying to get yield on Bitcoin and you're lending it out, like it's more than likely going to be sold for dollars. And it's like, that's not a trade you want to make. So the only
huge downside risk.
Yeah, I've like, no expert, but I did a lot of research on for the book, and there's only one group that I saw doing it what I would deem as like the right way, and it was like the Meanwhile group. So they have like life insurance. They also launched a private credit fund. It's fully denominated in Bitcoin. So investors pay in Bitcoin. They make loans in Bitcoin. The loans get paid back in Bitcoin, and then your yield gets paid back in Bitcoin. So it's Bitcoin denominated like the entire way. And so that's, to me, is like the only legitimate way you can earn yield on Bitcoin.
Rod recently mentioned to me that you were generating some yield on your 1,000 of your total stack, 1,000 of your Bitcoin, a small portion of it.
You know what? I wish I would take that and be like, yeah, fuck it.
Go for it.
Go for it. Yeah, I don't know. I think there are going to be ways, and I think you're right, if it's Bitcoin denominated and such. So one thing you said, which was so profound, we're so used to yield or interest on our dollars because it's so easy, right? The system is so easy to give us interest on that. And so a lot of these Bitcoin or pre-coiners come to me like, well, how do I earn money on my Bitcoin? I'm like, well, you don't.
That's
You
the
earn
secret.
Bitcoin. That's the
You
secret.
don't.
But seriously, congratulations. How long did it take you to write that book?
About 4 months.
4 months. Fuck yeah, man.
He's a very efficient
seriously, unbelievable. You're going to be here for the next 2 days for the Texas Energy and Mining Summit.
You bet.
Okay, awesome, man. Well, I want to rotate some people in as well. So huge round of applause for Wyatt. Let's give him
Thank
a round
you,
of
Wyatt
applause.
O'Rourke. Incredible.